Hello and welcome to Story Bridge. I'm your host, Patti Lucia. In this episode, I explore the sacred art and ritual of tattoo with my guest, Esme Hall. So, a warm welcome to my listeners. This is Patti with Story Bridge, and I am thrilled to be with you today with my first podcast and my first guest of the year in 2022. I know it's mid-February that we're recording this, but we were just talking about how this year has been so intense already that I've had to catch my breath quite often throughout January. So it's a real thrill to have the opportunity to be with my guest today. And the direction of Storybridge has shifted just a little bit. Just a reminder to my listeners. So I'm not doing stories in general so much as stories of particularly women who have endeavored to lead or at least follow spiritual lives, and they're on spiritual journeys, what that's looked like in their lives and what it looks like in 2022 with all that's going on in our world. So it's really thrilling to be with my first guest, Esme Hall. We met at through a course that Liv Mackay-Wheeler was conducting. And if you're a listener, you probably have heard my interviews with Liv Mackay-Wheeler. If you haven't, definitely check them out. They're fascinating. But she did a 4-month course on shamanic healing, and it was a really beautiful experience. And one of the beautiful things that came out of it was a new friendship acquaintance with Esme Hall. So Esme, thank you so much for being with me today. It's a thrill to spend this time. And could you introduce yourself to my listeners, or who you are, what you do? I know you are up in snowy Vermont, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I guess I split my time full time between my tattoo practice at my studio, Sacred Vessel Tattoo, and being a mom. Yeah, so I have 3 beautiful sons. My son Leroy is 23, and I have twins who are actually turning 11 on Monday. So
that's a gap.
It's a gap. Yeah. And my business is, well, owned by me. So it's woman-owned business, very small. I have a cute little studio in an old building in downtown Montpelier, Vermont, and have been working full-time as a tattoo artist since 2009. So
that's awesome. So much to ask, but I want to start at the beginning. Okay. I want to start because we're talking about spiritual journeys, and that could mean so many things to so many people. I kind of think of it as really kind of responding to that inner voice. It's not necessarily a religious calling, though it could be for some people. But more and more, when people are on spiritual journeys, they are very unique in and of themselves. They're not really meant to be like, like everybody is on the same journey, but we're all quite unique in our journey. And I think that makes sense. So I wanted to just ask how, what has your journey looked like? How did it begin? Can you say a little bit about the beginning? Like, was it an awakening that you had, or how did you step onto your, yeah.
Well, it's a little tricky to pinpoint, actually. So I grew up in a bit of what would now be pretty like more standard maybe, or common to grow up in a really alternative household. So I grew up having parents who meditated or did Tai Chi, and we were sort of like the weird hippie freaks. And so I was exposed to a lot of things from a very early age, like Qigong and Tai Chi and
Mm.
meditation, capoeira, yoga. I was
Now,
sort of
you,
part of the lifestyle.
and this was, yeah, I mean, this was in Vermont.
Yeah, we moved here when I was right around the time I turned 6. So
Mm.
yeah, I've been here primarily since the 80s, early 80s.
Wow. Now I had heard, I mean, because I grew up in Massachusetts,
Mhm.
right? But I had always heard that there were these self-contained communities up in Vermont who were kind of, living these freaky hippie lives, like very alternative,
Mhm.
very, very alternative kinds of communities. So is
Yeah.
that kind of what you grew up in? Was like a, not so much a commune, though I do know that there are communes up in
Yeah.
Vermont, but so what was it? Was it kind of a community that you grew up in, or were your parents just, that was kind of what they practiced?
Yeah, both. I mean, we
Mm,
grew up sort of adjacent to several communities, one in particular up on Prickly Mountain in Warren,
mhm,
Vermont. And so I definitely had exposure to that, or friends who lived in these more like communal environments of big wacky architecture buildings with organic
mhm.
gardens. And
Yeah.
my best childhood friends lived up in that community. And um, but also that was just my parents' lifestyle, very committed to natural living and to feeding us whole food and as chemical free as possible for the most part. Um, and that was like a journey that my father went through when he contracted malaria in Africa when he was in the Peace
Mm,
Corps. So
mm,
he had to go on a really intensive healing journey to survive that, and came to a lot of the practices like that I grew up with,
mm.
eating whole and really taking care of the body. And there are, Patty, still many sort of communes, if you will, and there
Yeah.
have been many in this area, like
That,
all the whole state. So
yeah,
yeah,
that have
there,
survived the years, the
well, or
generations.
these ones, sort of disbanded and dispersed, but then like it seems to be like this state attracts that sort of.
Uh-huh.
Um,
It's very interesting. Yeah, like
yeah,
energetically, what
yeah,
is that about? Because the energy of Vermont is very different than the energy of Massachusetts.
it is. It's true.
It's all part of New England, but the energy in Massachusetts is very different. I don't think that a lot of those experimental communities that have existed in Vermont for decades and decades and decades could have survived in Massachusetts.
Yeah, probably not.
I don't think so.
We tend to attract pretty fiercely independent thinkers
Mm,
and doers, and there's a certain hardiness required to survive the winters here.
yes.
They can kind of beat you down and go on and on.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, but there's also something really wonderful. Like so I'm from New England, but I also have been living in Florida and have come to really, really appreciate the the effects on our bodies, minds, and spirits going through seasons,
Mm,
like
mhm,
syncing up
mhm,
with the natural seasons,
mhm,
and having a deep understanding of them uh, on so many levels, including metaphorically, like, what is autumn and winter about, what is spring about, what's happening in nature, what's
mhm,
happening outside, and what's happening internally, like
mhm,
how are we connected with with the life, that's got like the life cycles in our world and in nature and our own life cycle, and our own changes. And so I think that it's interesting being in Florida. I've come to appreciate the impact of the seasons on those kind of deeper appreciations for the naturals, being able to sync up with those
Yeah.
natural cycles. So even though winter is hard, there's value in what we kind of like the changes we go through in wintertime.
Yeah, and it's taken me a long time to appreciate exactly what you're speaking to. Living here, growing up, winters were so hard for me. And now I'm really like, oh, okay, there is this richness to it, and having the full scope of the seasons and being on the land, and just what wildlife are you seeing, or what birds are you seeing and hearing. And I remember actually when my son Leroy moved to North Carolina, it was fall, and he was so disoriented because all the birds we hear here in the spring
Right.
were there. And he was
Yes.
like, this is so weird. I'm hearing all the robins and the birds. It sounds like springtime, but I know it's like we're going into winter. So
Yeah. Yeah, that could be disorienting, especially, if you're just kind of synced up to how the seasons are in your, your geographical area.
yeah.
So
And the
that's,
weather patterns.
and the
Yeah.
weather patterns
Yeah.
and such.
Mhm.
So what a fascinating way to grow up. I'm a little, I grew up in a very different family and community. It was much more blue collar, conservative, Catholic schools, that sort of thing. So that kind of environment. So I really appreciate the kind of way that you grew up. So so kind of exploring your own unique spiritual journey wasn't necessarily, I imagine, I might be assuming here, but wasn't necessarily this experience or this endeavor where you had to kind of go against the sensibilities of your parents. Like it seems like
No,
you lived in an environment that was conducive for those explorations.
definitely. And we had some might argue we had too much freedom growing up, or like not enough structure, not enough boundaries. It was pretty wild. And I'm one of 6 kids, and we have a
Mm,
pretty big span of ages between us. So, but there, things like painting a mural on the bedroom wall, or using tools that maybe other children weren't using, or having the potter's wheel out on the deck all summer. And that, yeah, that was just normal for us, but
mhm,
perhaps would be considered really bizarre. So I mean, we all found ways to rebel in other ways.
mhm, mhm.
There's still ways you push back against your parents, but um
I'm gonna go be conservative.
I'm gonna go vote. Yeah. Um, but no, we were really given a lot of exposure to alternative practices from a very young age. So my journey in, as far as spirituality goes, has not been linear. It's been sort of
Mhm,
really meandering and different layers and levels. And I really had a shite time in public school.
mm.
So I ended up just taking my GED when I was 16 and being like,
I'm
I'm out of
out.
here. I'm
Mhm,
out of, like, this is, I always had a sense of like, this system is fucked. It
mhm.
doesn't, and it's
Completely.
definitely not conducive to the highly sensitive person or the highly artistic person. And so
Mm-mm.
I was really lucky to have been homeschooled on and off, and have experienced both sort of that total freedom to explore one's interest and to work within inside the system, and um, be able to be supported by my parents to pursue my art from a very, very early age,
Mm,
and go to art school when I was quite young still. So
mm.
yeah, it's been a meandering journey through spirituality, and having that freedom to read books that maybe other 10th graders aren't reading, like Aldous Huxley, Doors of
Yeah.
Perception, or things like that. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, did you connect your art with spirituality at a young age, or did your, did your art evolve in that way as you meandered in your explorations?
Yeah, certainly. And I've spent a lot of time creating just sort of out of my vision and my heart. Also, having some formal training, but my art really exploded into a different level when I went to art school in the 90s, 94, 95 in Boston, and maybe was smoking a little bit too much weed, on and off, but doing a lot of exploration in that realm too as a young adult. And just the experience of creating art was always like my therapy, or my, like, I feel like I'll die if I'm not creating in some way, whether that's, so for me, it's always been medicinal, right?
Yeah, it's like soul connected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I agree with you, like art and kind of like this inner, I really do think that it opens up these gateways to kind of like our higher selves, our soul, our spirit. So I wanted to ask you, this is going to sound random, but
That's
whatever.
okay. Go for it.
Have you ever created art on mushrooms?
Yes.
And what was that like? I mean, did you like, can you share that experience?
Which time, Patti?
Well, maybe one that really stands out as a significant experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes that's been very intentional, like working with the plant medicine intentionally to go into that creative flow.
Right.
And I actually did that last year with my partner, Eric. We were in my art studio here, my tattoo studio, and very intentionally did. I don't think we actually took enough, but we had a lot of fun music going, creating on this big piece of paper together. And that was actually a recommendation from Andrew at one point to give that a try together. So yeah, that one stands out as far as like going in intentionally. And a lot of times for me, that's just spontaneous. If I'm engaging with any kind of plant medicine, that it's like it expresses itself through me, or it helps me take my ego to the side enough to just let it flow. And I mean, that being said, it's kind of like what I do. My jam. That's my jam, Patti.
Yeah, that's totally your jam.
Trying to like, okay, and in the work that I do with my clients, it's like I'm creating for them, right? So I have to do a fair bit of that anyway, of like, okay, like I'm working in service to this creation, and I gotta take the critical mind, or the inner critic has to just like shut the fuck up right now,
right? Because it's not about you, it's about creating for this unique individual and their expression. So now you started your business, and we can jump into this. You started your business in 2009.
Yes, that's when I got a bona fide business loan.
You got a bona fide. Now, before then, though, you had been, I'm sure that you were kind of exploring, you were doing tattoos for a while before you, okay. Were your tattoos did you always kind of do tattoos in the way that you are currently doing them? Just in maybe a less sophisticated way, or did you start off doing more traditional tattoos? I can't imagine you were doing traditional tattoos. I just had to ask. I can't imagine you doing like a Mickey and Minnie Mouse on anybody.
Yeah, I did a little wee Pooh Bear for someone once.
Okay.
So yeah, no, I mean, to answer that question, I've sort of had an interesting journey with that, because I'm autodidactic with many mediums, but tattoo, I was always drawn to that for some reason. And maybe that's because we were exposed to a lot of different cultures, and my father did live in Africa for some time. And there was something about that, like the primal, like the medicine woman or the shaman who was doing that
Yes.
work like in different traditions that really pulled me. Um and I started messing around with some little hand poke things on myself when I was
Mm-hmm.
15. And then, like I said, I went to art school. And so no, I've never had like a traditional track with tattoo. I have done some cartoon characters over the
Yeah.
years for people, but it's been a mixture of, they did start coming out very raw and channeled. And when I
Mm.
got my first set of equipment sitting in my little apartment where I lived with my still bestie from college, and tattooing myself, just trying to figure this equipment out. And she's like, "Oh, those are some nice runes. Why did you pick those runes?" And I'm sitting there like 18, like, what's a rune? I don't know what a rune is.
Exactly. But in a way, I have to, I just want to rewind a little bit because
Sure.
I don't want to let this go. So
Okay.
when you were young, before you went to college,
Yeah.
you were exposed to some tattoo traditions from around the world.
Sure. Yeah.
And so you're not coming from an American perspective of tattoos. These are because so you kind of were exposed to more of the sacred tradition of tattoo at a young age, like from the
Yeah.
African
And
culture or from India or whatever. Could you
Asia, yeah.
say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So we grew up with a lot of cultural, being exposed to a lot of different cultures through music, like records, vinyl, books. My dad, some of his photographs and stories of his time
Mm,
in in Africa and the Peace Corps, but also like foreign film or museums and things like this. So like we were protected, but there wasn't also censorship. Like we saw people's naked bodies because that's
mhm,
in their tradition and culture, that's how they lived. And
mhm.
um so that really always pulled me. And um
Were you exposed to, or how much did you learn about tattoo traditions in other cultures? Did you explore those
yeah, I
in other
did, like,
cultures?
and that was mostly through books.
Mm,
And I still have some great ones. I can't remember his name. I have it in there though. There's a really great book of this guy who travels to Indonesia and works with like shamans and the
mhm,
traditional tattoo. So I read a lot about it, and I would find different resources like that, did a lot of reading. And sort of, yeah, there was exposure to sort of traditional American tattooing in that I saw it on people and I really didn't like it.
mhm.
It didn't really draw me. And while I could technically create that, it doesn't, any way you look at it. And if the practice of tattooing was brought to America, right, like largely through the seafaring crowd, right?
Yes, the anchors on the arms,
Yeah,
flag.
and so like tattoo is an essentially like a rite of passage, right?
Mhm,
It's a marking of a time and a place and an experience, and we take that into our body. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to remember that, or I earned this, or
mhm,
this is my signature of that experience. So I think it's like, well, they essentially were doing the same thing
mhm,
in a ceremonial way. It's just maybe without the connect, like the deliberate or direct connection to spirit, but that's still
mhm.
like how it expresses is like, oh, I earned this, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the tattoo scene in like the 90s was like pretty crazy. And I wasn't super connected because when I started tattooing in Boston, it was still illegal.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think that the sort of American tradition of tattooing is tied to some sense of a rite of passage and a in a badge of honor and in that way. So I don't think it's
Mhm,
that as bastardized as maybe
mhm,
some people think, at least from my
mhm,
perspective.
mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good to know. So what was the tattoo scene like in the 90s?
Pretty loud and aggressive, and like getting, it was when like a lot of colors started getting used, or sort of new
Mhm,
school started coming out of like more, these like big cartoony wild or
Mm-hmm.
there was like a lot of the big heavy black tribal work,
Mm-hmm.
um and I really do think it's people's desire to connect with that experience of going through this process of, yeah, there's something really primal about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also like the 90s is when I was trying to learn, and I couldn't find anyone to teach me because I was just this like little girl with dreadlocks
Mm-hmm.
who was at art school, and it was just like dudes,
Yeah.
dudes in tattoo shops, like, oh, little girl, that's funny. You want a tattoo? I don't think you can handle it. So I just did
Yeah.
it on my own and learned on my own. And
Yeah,
I
that's an
did
interesting,
eventually.
yeah, I'm sorry, interesting
uh,
dynamic about how male dominated it was in,
yeah,
yeah, it may still be.
that's why I had kind of just went on my own, and I practiced on my own for 9 years on myself and my friends, and on and off, like sort of inconsistently. But then I did eventually get an apprenticeship and get my license, and in a very male dominated like bro shop, and
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't hang with it. It was just a
Mm-hmm.
toxic environment, and so I went out on my own.
Yeah, so you went on your
I
own.
made a space where it felt comfortable, because that's what people keep saying. Like, it's so comfortable to come see you. Like,
Yeah.
it's like we're in your kitchen, you're feeding me miso soup,
Mm-hmm.
and we're
Mm-hmm.
tattooing. And I'm like, yeah, and it's not really legit. And so I have to either shit or get off the pot and create a space where it
Mm-hmm.
can still feel like that. It can
Mm-hmm.
still feel like you're being held, or just you're just hanging in someone's
Yeah.
home space.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a more like nurturing, loving environment. And we've got like whatever music on that's not like
Yeah,
yeah,
wow. That's a totally different scene.
yeah.
That's a totally different scene. Now, do you know many other women tattoo artists who have created similar kinds of
Mhm.
studio spaces for their clients?
Well, I have my friend Meredith. She's local, the Shady Lady.
Hmm.
And as far as creating of the whole, I don't know a lot. I mean, I kind of work a little bit in my own bubble, and there are some
Hmm.
now. At the time when I made mine, there were none. In
Mm.
2009, when I opened,
You're it.
there were, to my awareness, there were no other female like safe spaces to get a tattoo.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and it just felt like the right thing to do, even though everyone told me I was crazy.
So you got your loan, you got approved, you got your space, you were
Mhm.
legit, and
Legit.
you're legit, yeah, in
Yeah,
quotes,
yeah, yeah.
in air quotes,
Licensed.
right? Can you say a little bit about those early years and how things have evolved?
Yeah. So the early years were, there was for me, like, there was a lot of, I guess, sort of self-doubt, like a lot of I had to come up against a lot of like, ooh, can I really do this? And I'm not a business person. I don't know what I'm doing, and having to like learn how to do what I'm doing and kind of invent how I wanted to do it. But there was a lot of second guessing and doubt. And then it just kind of kept working. And we moved into a bigger space pretty quickly because I outgrew the 200 square feet that I had,
Mm, wonderful.
you know, and yeah, I moved the space a few times to sort of grow. And I took on an apprentice and then another apprentice, and that was growing. And I got shut down pretty early. I got pregnant with the twins, and they came early in 2011. So the business folded. My first business, Venus
Wow.
Tattoos,
Wow.
put that aside for a while. Yeah.
For how long?
I reopened in 2017 as Sacred
Okay.
Vessel. Yeah. But the early years were hard, and I didn't really know what I was doing.
Hmm.
Sometimes I still don't.
Well, so when you reopened in 2017, had motherhood impacted the way you were going to do business and the kind of tattoos you were doing? Was that influencing your art when you reopened?
Yeah, I mean, and I was a mother before too. So
Mm,
my son Leroy is 20, he's turning 24 this year.
Right.
So he was right along with the ride of opening the studio and like setting up my station with 2 gloves that were too big on. Having twins definitely changed a lot of things in my life and definitely influenced my art and my like expanded awareness of like how is that even possible for 2 human bodies to be inside of my body, right? um to blow your mind a bit. It also really motivated me a lot more to just dedicate to this and be like, I've done this before. I know I can do it. I know I'm meant to do this. And then like coming out of the closet about like, oh, hey guys, there's this other thing I do, which is just like make it up in the moment with you. It was like intuitive tattoo work.
Mhm.
And that also started to come out. I let people know that in like 2018. And so from
Mm.
there, it's been like a really interesting evolving process that is like so
Yeah.
exciting to me. And I like love what I do so much now. But
I would love to know more about this whole experience you describe as coming out of the closet with this. So I imagine it's something that perhaps you experiment, you were exploring, but you were kind of keeping it quiet.
yeah.
And so, first of all, if you could say a little bit about what exactly intuitive tattooing is and what it was like when you kind of came out of the I see it as almost like a coming out of the spiritual closet in a way.
So it's really evolved and it's something that, I mean, it's what I was doing on myself, right? When I
Mhm.
started, it was just like no plan. I just would start, things would show up and I would tattoo them.
Mhm.
And I had done some work in my early 20s with people where I was like, okay, well, just talk to me about yourself and your life, and I'll draw while you're talking, and then we'll tattoo that. And these like really interesting things would come out. And so that's evolved into what is now like, to me, is like a really sacred and holy ceremonial process that has not just the tattooing involved, right? Where it's like
Mhm.
a really safe bubble of space for a person to receive. We don't necessarily have a plan when we start of where we're going to work or what it's going to look like. We might know some elements, we might wanting to be specifically addressing a certain part of the body, but we'll sit in a meditative space probably for the first hour doing grounding and invocation and
Mhm.
like really some deep listening to my client sharing with me in that sacred space that's protected. And the guides and the guardians have been called in and
Mhm.
offerings have been made. And then I do like some hands-on energy clearing and working directly with their body to see how their body's responding to whatever's going on. And I start to get information just by gently, I guess it's kind of like Reiki, right?
Mhm.
Like gentle energetic connection with the body. Certain things will light up or there'll be a twitching somewhere. And so just following really the wisdom and the guidance of an individual's body, we can get to a place of pulling like all that energetic work that we've done into the creation of some form of image that we take it into our body.
Mhm.
And so like the medicine of the tattoo is like all of the work we've already done, and then it's like the physical experience. And I don't know if you have any tattoos, Patty, but
I don't. I would definitely get a tattoo from you. That sounds awesome. I might have
yeah,
to
but
travel up to Vermont to get that kind of
come
tattoo
on up,
because
Patty. Yeah.
because that's the kind of, yeah, that's the kind of tattoo I would get, but I've never honestly heard anyone describe the tattoo process that way.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
my thing with tattoos is it's permanent, and and my body is sacred, and so I don't want to put anything on my body that's less than that, and
Yeah.
it's permanent. And so that's kind of how I've felt about tattoos my whole life, but I have never heard anyone describe a tattoo process like you just
Yeah.
did.
Well, and to me, like tattooing it is a sacred process. Like that's why my business is called Sacred Vessel, because this is our one sacred vessel we get while
Mm-hmm.
we're here this time, right? Like people refer to it as many different things, but it is something like the process of receiving a tattoo, whether you're giving it to yourself or receiving it from someone else, or something about that snaps you into the present moment like nothing else in this way, that also allows you to, or one, if they want to engage it this way, to journey, right? It creates a
Mm-hmm.
whole chain reaction of chemicals and hormones and
Yeah.
all kinds of things are happening in the body. And when we go in with intention to specifically like heal potential trauma or to celebrate something or to discover, like explore like in this way, that's also very, can be a very huge somatic release for people.
Oh,
And they can
absolutely.
have, you know, having like an altered consciousness experience just through that process and doing breath work and breathing while you're
Mm-hmm.
in there, right? You're like in
Mm-hmm.
there, you're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing yourself in this very intentional, immediate way that is often really, really uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
but can be like profoundly liberating and healing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of my take on the work. And I do know a few other practitioners who work in this way. One is Malia Luna, who's also studied under Liv in
Mm-hmm.
the past, and I've been honored to tattoo her and receive work from her as well. And it's profound medicine, and it can take a while to really integrate after that process of like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but it helps. I think it helps for me anyway. It helps reach new layers of understanding of the self and how we relate to ourself or
Yeah.
experience ourselves.
Absolutely. And as you were speaking, and that was just so beautiful, Esme, just so, so beautiful,
Mhm.
what you're describing. And I kept thinking about ritual
Mhm.
and how, you know, in our culture, particularly in the West, we've kind of lost our way when it comes to ritual, you know, sacred ritual in our lives. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, this is a ritual. This is an important ritual and should be related to as an important ritual, that it is a sacred ritual. And even when people get tattooed as kind of a way to remember a milestone in their lives, it's you know, it's often something you hear described as, well, you know, we got really drunk on Saturday night and
Ah.
I got this tattoo at about 2 in the morning. Like those kinds of experiences, you know.
Yeah, I've heard many of those experiences, and I've worked with people to recreate those experiences into something new,
Yeah.
right?
You mean someone who's gotten a tattoo like that?
Yeah, someone who's like, oh God, I can't believe I did this, and look, it's terrible, and I'm so ashamed. And then it's like, well, let's rewrite that story and
Uh,
create something really beautiful and meaningful for you that
mhm.
honestly wouldn't have been able to come into creation if you hadn't made that drunken mistake at
Yeah,
2 in the morning. Also,
exactly.
like, who are these assholes who are tattooing drunk people at 2 in the morning? Oh, they're just
Mm,
like greedy for, they're like, ah, whatever. If you're
yeah,
stupid enough to come in here, I'll tattoo something stupid on you.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it's not how I work. So
yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It's interesting about the connection to story and rewriting story, because I'm all about the power of story. But I think what you do, Esme, is you really help people tell the stories that they want to tell through tattoo, kind of in a way that just really honors the story. And in some cases where the story has to be rewritten to move beyond whatever shame one might feel, that it is also a story that can be rewritten. And I often talk about stories being rewritten, like stories we tell ourselves that are more fearful stories. And so then we live our lives according to these stories that might be fearful and this and that, or full of shame or full of blame. And how can we rewrite those stories and
yeah,
change
yeah.
the trajectory of our lives? And I think, you're able to do that for people through the
Wow.
stories they tell in tattoos.
Yeah, well, I aim to. I hope I'm able to, and I do. I have worked with many people who've needed some really big help with that, like with their self-esteem and how they view themselves. And I think that's largely why so many people are drawn to tattoo in this day and age, and just becoming so much more common. People are hungry for ritual. They're hungry for being honored.
Mhm.
They're hungry for being just their own unique expression. Permanent, only as permanent as we are. These vessels aren't permanent.
Mhm.
Um, but working with people who've had, who have cutting scars,
Mhm.
right? And just being like, I'm just so sick of how the world treats me because of this. And I was a scared, confused teenager when this happened. And so then we create like some magical, beautiful thing there. And no longer is the story I have to be ashamed of showing
Yeah.
myself.
Or identify as a cutter.
Yeah, and then
Right.
the story is now like I'm a resilient person.
Mhm.
I can change. I have done
Mhm.
something to empower myself and to feel good in the world and to be seen with loving eyes.
And rewrite the story of pain into
Yeah.
something beautiful. So now, I mean, we've all gone through so much in the last couple of years. It's impacted small businesses like yours and like so many. I mean, like in a way, I've been a little relieved that my cafe closed in 2016
Mm,
because I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have survived what's gone on in the
yeah.
last couple of years. So my question is probably multifaceted. I
Okay.
kind of wanted to hear how this has affected your business in the
Mm,
last couple of years, and also the people that you see, how it's affected them. Like, what are the shifts that you've seen, and what has your response been to the shifts in people
mhm.
over the last couple of years, and the kind of expressions that they might be wanting now, or kind of what might be coming through in your intuitive tattooing.
I mean, honestly, the beginning when I voluntarily closed, I think a week before we were mandated to close, and I was pretty pissed actually.
Mm,
I was pissed because I was
yeah.
like, long story short, I had to shut down for 3 months. I was very lucky to have some incredible clients reach out to me and prepay some tattoo hours, like just with the faith that we'd be able to reopen.
Yeah.
And it was like an interesting thing because in the beginning it was just like rugged, right? There was a lot
Mm,
of rugged energy. Everybody was freaking the fuck out,
mhm.
swallowed by the fear. I for myself was just in like, well, how am I going to feed my kids, right?
Exactly.
Like there's no support network. Like we went into it at one of our slowest times of year as far
Mm,
as like numbers in the business. I lost both of the other artists that work here who are still near and dear to me, but they moved on to other locations. And so suddenly it was just me, back to just me.
mhm.
And when I was able to reopen, what I found was that whatever people were going through during that time period, it made them so much more present in the moment of like, well, fuck it, I could die tomorrow. I've always wanted a tattoo. I'm
Mm,
just going to go for it,
yeah.
and working with people who came in and started crying when I put my hands on them because they hadn't been touched by another human in 6 months.
Wow.
Right. So there was this thirst and this hunger and this, like, I thought was really profound and beautiful way that at least the people who are drawn to my work, and I love my clients dearly. I have incredible people that come here and I meet so many amazing people through this work. Like, it's really cool. But I found that like with the general sort of like climate, right? This also felt like a safe place for people to come, also because the only safety protocol we had to change was putting masks on here
Mhm.
and not having potentially as many people in the studio at one time, which also meant I could do much deeper work with people. It created a space where we could go deeper. I often hear people say, like, I've always wanted a tattoo, but I've never known what. And so then they hear about the process that I do in ceremony, and they're like, oh, okay. Like I've seen enough of your work to be like, yeah, let's find out what mine is. Like what's
Mhm.
mine. And I have the great fortune of my now partner, Eric. He came to me in 2018, just sort of like, I heard about what you do, and I've always wanted someone to do that. So go for it. And we're still making that tattoo like 3.5 years later. It's like there's layers and layers and layers that like evolve and expand, and
Now, is that also true for some of your other clients?
that they come
Where,
back.
well, that that the tattoos that they're doing are layered? Yeah.
Yeah, and they come in and they grow, and
Mhm.
and sometimes that's like in pretty fast succession, and I'll work with someone twice a month for many months in a row, and sometimes that's like we worked together 5 years ago, I'm ready, now I'm ready. It's like it took them 5 years to integrate and to sort of feel into the next expression of
Mhm.
themselves, being ready to come out. So
Mhm.
for me, being now in 2022, my business did great once we were able to reopen.
And so are you saying that you were busier once you reopened than you were before? And how do you understand that? What do you think that's about?
I think it's about people grappling with their mortality, right? We've
Mm,
all had to think about that a lot more, and
mm,
everyone comes to that from a different perspective, but that's how I see it.
mm,
2020, I kept things pretty private in here, started out slow. By the summer of 2021, it was like gangbusters. And
mm.
I was really booked out quite a ways because people were just, I think, recognizing that it's sort of like, if you've ever wanted to do something, it's now or never,
You
right?
know,
Like,
that's true.
do it. If you
Mm-hmm,
want to do that, do it. Even if your mom, like
mm-hmm,
I hear people say, oh, I have to wait till my
mm-hmm,
mom dies before I can get a tattoo. She would disown me.
mm-hmm.
And it's sort of like, at what point do we just stand in our truth and our power, our
That's
sovereignty,
right.
in our, and like,
Our sovereignty, yeah.
this is my, like, this is
Yeah.
mine.
That's right.
Fucking hands off. If I want a tattoo, I'm gonna get it. My mom even got a tattoo.
That's awesome. So you've really been a part of people's healing process as they emerge out of this traumatic couple of years that we've all
Mhm.
been through. You've kind of been part of their healing process. It
Yeah, and
sounds like
they've been part of mine.
part of
There's
yours.
Yeah, definitely. And I learned so much, and it's sort of ever growing and evolving process. And
Hmm.
but it's helped me find a new awareness of like every time we tattoo or work with the body, it is sacred. Every time we tattoo, whether it's in a full-blown ceremony or we're coming in today to do some botanical work and we're going to tattoo some roses on Patty's arm. Roses the way I tattoo them.
That
That
sounds lovely.
Right? Like that's a ritual and a ceremony too. And it's an
Mhm.
honoring of, yeah, it's an honoring, it's a receiving. And I receive so much when I work with people in that way too, is like the beautiful energy that's created together, and that it is a very intimate thing. And I like personally don't have a lot of tattoos from other tattoo artists because
Mm,
energetically there aren't many people in my close surroundings that I trust to do that for me.
mhm. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. I want to ask you how people can, and do you, by the way, do you
Mhm.
have people who, you're in Vermont, but do
Mhm.
you have people who travel to
To
you
see me
from distances?
a little bit, mostly from Massachusetts
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes from Maine, but like I don't have people flying on jet planes to come see me. I'm kind of like
Yet.
I don't I don't do a lot of advertising or anything. I'm
Uh-huh.
just sort of like I
Mhm.
have my work out in the world, and the people who I'm meant to work with find me and they find
Yep.
their way here. I do hope that those people who I'm meant to work with or who need what I might be able to offer to them can find me. And
Well, how can people find
how
you?
can
As
people find me? People can find me on Instagram, which is at Sacred Vessel Tattoo, or my website, which is sacredvesseltattoo.com.
wonderful. This has been such a delight to spend
Mhm.
time with you, Esme. What a fascinating
Yeah.
story. I think we'll probably have another conversation simply because this has been so delightful. So we'll have to do this again.
Okay, I'm game. It's been a really good pleasure for me too to be able to share a little bit and chat with you. It's always fun to hang out,
A-
Patty.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you, Esme. And
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure. Until next time, have a beautiful day.
yeah, you too. Thanks, bye.